bobcat was spotted carrying a shoe in its mouth, but this was no coincidence. The predator was collecting shoes on purpose. When Mikhail and Jessica rolled back the security footage, they saw a bobcat moving silently, snatching the shoe and disappearing into the brush. Why would a wild bobcat steal shoes? The next morning, they followed the tracks into the wilderness. From the shadows, the thief returned, calm, powerful, and carrying something in its mouth. It wasn't his shoe this time, but a bright blue child's boot. What they uncovered was so shocking it shattered everything they believed about survival. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It began as nothing more than a minor domestic mystery, the kind of trivial puzzle that punctuates the quiet rhythm of retired life. Mikhail adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and squinted at the front porch. A familiar landscape that had suddenly, inexplicably changed. One of his well-worn gardening sneakers was missing. The other, its faithful twin, sat neatly by the welcome mat, a solitary sentinel left to bear witness to the morning's peculiar crime. A faint dew still clung to its canvas, sparkling in the early sun as if mocking him with its very presence. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound in his chest. His first thought, logical and immediate, was of Buster, the boisterous golden retriever who lived 2 houses down. Buster had a notorious fondness for anything not nailed down, and a particular penchant for footwear. "Jessica," Mikhail called, his voice carrying through the screen door into the warm, coffee-scented air of their small home. "You won't believe this. Buster's been at it again." Jessica appeared, wiping her hands on her apron, her silver hair catching the light like a halo. She followed his gaze to the single lonely sneaker. A small smile played on her lips. "Oh, that rascal. Are you sure? He usually leaves a trail of slobber as a calling card." "Well, something's made off with it," Mikhail grumbled, though without any real heat. He stepped onto the porch, his bare feet cool against the painted wood. For 35 years, he'd built things. Custom cabinets, intricate bookshelves, sturdy decks that could withstand a hurricane. He was a man who appreciated order, a man who believed everything had its proper place. A single shoe on the porch was an affront to that principle. Together, they began the search. They scoured the yard, peering under the sprawling hydrangea bushes whose blooms were just beginning to fade from vibrant blue to a soft, dusky purple. They checked behind the woodpile Mikhail had so meticulously stacked for the coming autumn. Mikhail whistled for Buster, a sharp, two-toned call that usually brought the dog bounding over in a flurry of golden fur and clumsy enthusiasm. But the neighborhood remained silent, save for the chatter of a nearby blue jay scolding them from a high branch of their ancient oak tree. The only evidence they found was a series of muddy prints near the edge of the porch steps. Mikhail bent down for a closer look, his old knees protesting with a soft groan. These weren't Buster's prints. They were smaller, more delicate, but also possessed a strange, elongated shape he couldn't place. They looked almost feline, but larger than any house cat he'd ever seen. And there was something else, an odd drag mark accompanying the prints, as if whatever made them had been carrying something cumbersome. The trail led a few feet into the damp grass before vanishing completely, as if the thief had simply melted into the morning mist. "That's odd," Jessica murmured, peering over his shoulder. "They're not dog prints at all." "No," Mikhail agreed, a furrow forming between his brows. A sliver of unease pricked at him. Their home in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains was a slice of paradise, but it was a paradise they shared with the wild. They'd seen deer grazing in their backyard, heard the hoot of owls at night, and once, a black bear had ambled through their property on its way to someplace more interesting. This felt different, more deliberate, more personal. The unease lingered throughout the day. It was a quiet, nagging question at the back of his mind. By evening, his frustration had solidified into a stubborn resolve. "I'm pulling up the security footage," he announced after dinner. Jessica looked up from her knitting. "For a single sneaker, Mick? Isn't that a bit much?" "It's the principle of the thing," he declared, already heading for the small office where he kept the computer. "I don't like mysteries on my own front porch." The security camera was a small concession to modernity he'd installed a few years back, more for peace of mind than any real concern about crime. He scrolled back the footage to the pre-dawn hours, the screen displaying a grainy, monochrome world of shifting shadows. The minutes ticked by and fast forward. A raccoon making its nightly rounds, a flurry of moths dancing around the porch light. Then, at 4:52 a.m., something new. A shadow flickered at the edge of the frame. It was low to the ground, moving with a silent, deliberate grace that was utterly captivating. Its movement was liquid, a ripple of muscle and purpose. Mikhail slowed the footage, leaning closer to the screen. The creature paused at the bottom of the steps, its form still cloaked in the gloom. He could just make out a pair of pointed, tufted ears and the distinct bobbed tail. "A bobcat," Mikhail breathed, a note of awe in his voice. Jessica came to stand behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Goodness, it's a big one." They watched as the bobcat ascended the steps, each paw placed with surgical precision. It surveyed the porch, its head turning slowly, taking in the rocking chairs, the potted geraniums, and the 2 pairs of shoes left by the door. It ignored Jessica's clogs completely, moving directly to his sneakers. With a delicate snatch, it plucked one up, the shoe looking absurdly large in its mouth. Then, as silently as it had arrived, it turned and melted back into the darkness. "Well, I'll be," Mikhail said, leaning back in his chair. "A bobcat, a shoe-stealing bobcat." Jessica's initial unease had transformed into fascination. "But why? Why would a bobcat want your smelly old sneaker?" she whispered, as if the creature could still hear them. "Too big for a cat, too fluid for a person." It's a wild thing with a secret. The mystery, far from being solved, had only deepened. It was no longer about a missing shoe. It was about the strange, inexplicable behavior of their wild neighbor. The next morning, armed with a new sense of purpose, they decided to follow the tracks again, hoping the trail might be clearer now that they knew what they were looking for. They found the faint impressions where they'd left off, at the edge of their manicured lawn where the wilderness began to assert itself. The trail led them toward the dense woods that bordered their property, a familiar territory that suddenly felt charged with new meaning. The trees, mostly oak and hickory, creaked and groaned in the gentle morning breeze, their leaves rustling as if whispering secrets about the intruder. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, the primordial scent of the forest floor. Mikhail's heart, steady and reliable for 72 years, beat a little faster. This was different from his usual morning walks. He was an observer, a trespasser in another creature's domain. Jessica walked close beside him, her usual calm replaced by a quiet intensity. She clutched his arm, not out of fear, but as if to share the electric sense of anticipation that hung in the air between them. The tracks were a confusing puzzle. They overlapped in strange patterns. Here, they looked sharp and clear, the four-toed print of a feline. But there, they were smudged, almost resembling the print of a child's bare foot where the animal had shifted its weight. In other spots, where the ground was softer, the impressions were deep and heavy, hinting at the powerful pads of a large animal carrying a burden. The trail was not a straight line, but a meandering path, twisting and turning through the undergrowth as if following a logic known only to its creator. They walked for what felt like an hour, venturing deeper into the woods than they usually did. The familiar bird calls were replaced by a profound silence. The dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy painted shifting patterns on the ground, disorienting them, making them feel as if the very woods were watching. Then, just as Mikael was beginning to think they'd lost the trail for good, Jessica let out a soft gasp. "Mick, look!" She was pointing to a large, moss-covered rock at the edge of a small clearing, and perched atop it as if placed there for display was his missing sneaker. It was damp from the morning dew and had a few leaves stuck to its laces, but it was otherwise unharmed. Mikael approached it cautiously, half expecting the bobcat to leap out from behind the rock. He bent down to retrieve it, his fingers brushing against the still damp canvas. As he straightened up, a sharp snap echoed through the clearing, the sound of a twig breaking under a heavy foot. It came from behind them. Jessica spun around, her eyes wide. Mikael froze, his hand still holding the sneaker, his body rigid. They both held their breath, straining their ears against the sudden, deafening silence of the forest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from the shadows of a massive fallen oak tree whose roots clawed at the air like a skeletal hand, a figure emerged. It was the bobcat. It stepped into the dappled sunlight with a slow, unhurried confidence that was both terrifying and magnificent. It was larger than they had imagined from the grainy security footage, its body a coil of lean, powerful muscle beneath a beautifully spotted coat of tan and brown. Its tufted ears swiveled, and its short, black-tipped tail gave a slight twitch. It fixed them with eyes the color of amber, not with aggression, but with a look of calm, predatory assessment. It was the queen of this domain, and they were the intruders. Clenched firmly in its jaws was another shoe, not one of theirs, but a child's bright blue rain boot, caked with mud. The sight was so bizarre, so completely out of place, that for a second, Mikael's fear was eclipsed by sheer astonishment. The bobcat regarded them for another moment. Then, with a fluid leap that seemed to defy gravity, it bounded onto a higher boulder near the fallen oak. And behind that boulder lay the revelation. It was a heap of old shoes, a bizarre, chaotic pile, a trophy collection of stolen footwear. There were sneakers of every color, rugged work boots with their laces chewed through, and even a pair of fuzzy wool slippers that looked as though they'd been weathering the elements for months. Mikael's sneaker was merely the latest addition to this strange hoard. For a few seconds, Mikael and Jessica could only stare, their minds struggling to process the scene. It was a thief's lair, but the treasure was worthless. What on earth was going on? Then Jessica, her gaze sharper, her senses more attuned to the subtle details, touched Mikael's arm again. Her touch was soft, insistent. "Mick," she whispered, her voice filled with a breathtaking wonder. "Look closer." Inside the shoes. Mikael squinted, following her gaze. He saw a flicker of movement within a battered old hiking boot. A tiny spotted head poked out, its ears ridiculously small, its blue eyes barely open. Then he saw another, curled inside a worn-out leather loafer, and a third, nestled deep within the plush lining of one of the wool slippers. Kittens. 3 tiny bobcat kittens, curled up in the warmth and shelter of the stolen shoes. The truth crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He looked from the vulnerable, sleeping kittens to the massive, fallen oak tree. A huge section of the trunk had split open, likely during the last big thunderstorm that had rolled through the valley. The bobcat's original den, a hollow within the tree, was now exposed to the elements, a cold wind blowing straight through the fractured wood. The mother bobcat wasn't a thief in the way a human would understand it. She wasn't collecting trophies. She was a mother, desperate and ingenious. She had found a way to protect her babies from the encroaching chill. The shoes, with their soft linings, insulated soles, and enclosed spaces, were perfect, individual-sized nests to keep her fragile newborns warm and safe. Each stolen shoe was an act of fierce, desperate love. The fear Mikhail had felt moments before evaporated completely, replaced by a wave of profound awe and a surprising ache in his chest. He looked at the mother bobcat, who was still watching them with those unwavering yellow eyes, the child's boot still in her mouth. She wasn't a threat. She was a provider. She was doing what any mother would do, using whatever tools she could find to protect her children. A soft laugh escaped Jessica's lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. It broke the tension in the clearing. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound, but it didn't move. "Well," Jessica whispered, squeezing Mikhail's hand, "at least we know she has good taste. Your shoes are very comfortable." Mikhail shook his head, a nervous chuckle escaping him as he finally lowered his own reclaimed sneaker. The sheer absurdity and profound tenderness of the situation were overwhelming. All his frustration over the missing shoe seemed petty and foolish now. He felt a deep sense of humility, a feeling of being granted a glimpse into a secret world governed by instincts and needs far more primal and powerful than his own. "Stay here," Jessica said softly, her eyes never leaving the bobcat family. "Don't move." She turned and began walking back the way they came, her steps quiet but purposeful. Mikhail remained, a silent guardian in the clearing. He and the mother bobcat watched each other, a silent understanding passing between man and wild animal. He was no longer a threat, and she seemed to understand that. She carefully set down the blue boot and began to groom one of her kittens with rough, tender licks of her tongue. Minutes later, Jessica returned. In her arms, she carried a thick, faded quilt, one she had made years ago. It was soft from 1,000 washings, imbued with the scent of their home, of cedar and lavender and love. Slowly, carefully, she approached the den. The mother bobcat tensed, a low growl rumbling in her chest, but she didn't move from her perch. She watched Jessica's every move. Jessica didn't try to get too close to the kittens. Instead, she gently unfolded the quilt and laid it over the opening of the fractured log, creating a warm, insulated curtain that would block the wind. Then, she took a corner of the quilt and tucked it into the pile of shoes, creating a soft, warm bed around the makeshift nests. She backed away slowly, her movements calm and non-threatening. She rejoined Mikhail, and together, they stood and watched. After a long moment, the mother bobcat seemed to deem the new addition safe. She leaped down from her rock, sniffed at the edge of the quilt, and then disappeared behind it, into the new, warmer darkness of her home. They stood there for a while longer, two silent figures at the edge of the clearing, their hearts full. The mystery of the missing shoe had been solved, But the solution was more poignant and heartwarming than anything they could have ever imagined. It was a story of survival, of a mother's ingenuity, and of the invisible threads that connect all living creatures. As they walked back toward their house, the forest no longer felt alien or intimidating. It felt like a neighborhood, and the bobcat was just another resident, a single mother doing her best in a tough situation. That evening, as Mikhail sat on the porch, he looked at his remaining sneaker. He wouldn't be getting its partner back, and he was perfectly okay with that. He imagined it nestled in the pile, perhaps providing a cozy bed for one of the kittens. Jessica came out and sat beside him in her rocking chair, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. "You know," she said, her voice soft in the twilight, "we should probably leave something else out for her. Just in case." Mikhail smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked out toward the dark line of trees, a silent promise passing between him and the wilderness. "I was thinking the same thing," he replied, reaching over to take his wife's hand. "But next time, I'll put an old blanket on the porch instead of my shoes."